you could like turn on the slide. Today, we're on to wrap up the sermon series on life stages. We've been talking about different life stages, and today I have a special message on teenage parenting. I actually, like, when I look at it, it seems a little bit odd for the English ministry, because like none of you except for me, I don't know, Pastor Paul is like beyond that stage. So I am the only one who is like still a teenage parent, and so still some time to come. You know, my son Sophus is like 15 years old. My daughter is 20 years old. So I'm still kind of in the thick of it when it comes to So Irene and I have two children. Our daughter Carrie is 20 years old. She is actually here today. She's helping out with Tiffany with children ministry over there. And our son Sophus, he is like 15 years old. As I said, Irene and I are still kind of in the range of the teenage parents. But like, I hope this message can also inspire you to help out with your younger brothers and younger sister who are still in the teenage years. So, like, it's nothing like a real parent, but even if you have big brothers and big sister around, it's always going to help them. So this is like, hopefully something that you can learn too. Among the three Milpeters family pastor, we have divided up into three sub-zones. We call it like LMS, to match our body size. Pastor Sam is not here. He's responsible for S, basically K to 6. And Pastor Paul takes care of the L, the empty nester. And Pastor Caleb and I sort of in a bit between, right? He is, of course, a lot like have more body mass than me, but like I have a higher weight than him. So we are kind of in the middle. So the reason exchange of English adult and the teenage worship give us a benefit. Hopefully, once we settle down with this new schedule, we'll be able to visit more live groups, and for the English ministry, have more 11 a.m. programs. This is what it is. So that's why I'm the one who is tasked to talk a little bit about helping out with teenagers. If you ask me to say a few words about parenting teenagers, without a doubt, the first thing I would say is this: the elders shall serve the younger. In Chinese, we have this saying that one wave comes after another in the Yangtze River. What does that mean? Sometimes we also have another village which is hard to translate. The green came from the blue, but it's superior to the blue and have something to do with marble and jade. Now, but all of this means basically one thing is the younger generation. One time, at some point, they will come on stage, and some of us who are standing on stage will come off stage. Of course, for most parents, it seems hard to believe that the unruly teenage children will one day achieve more in life than themselves. In fact, you ask most people, like most teenage parents, they look at the world around them, and especially young people in front of them, the so-called millennials and the younger one, what they call Gen Z. The gut reaction is more like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. But today my message is to explain the wisdom that every generation will invariably pass away, and the next generation, as we sang earlier, will come and take their place. Not only that, holding on to that belief that the younger will one day surpass the elder is indeed how we ought to help out with our next generation. Now, here in Silicon Valley, not only is it possible for an upstart to take on an old god, sometimes you hear of stories of miraculous resurrection. Apple, Apple Computer is, of course, the biggest tech company today. But I remember when I graduated from college in the mid-90s, Apple went through a few years of decline. In fact, this was the cover story of Business Week in February 1996, the fall of an American icon. When they brought back Steve Jobs to Apple, this former CEO, they were really a few quarters away from going bankrupt. And it was like when I first preached this sermon in the Mandarin version a few weeks ago, it was a special day. Because on August 6, 1997, Apple had an investor conference, and the late Steve Jobs introduced a surprise guest, Mr. Bill Gates, who just chipped in $150 million of his own money to invest in Apple, right? Microsoft founder invest in Apple. Apple actually was a much bigger company than Microsoft back in the 1980s. So talking about the elder serving the younger. Now, even though Microsoft and Apple had always been like fierce competitor, Mr. Gates himself is said to have a soft spot for Apple. After all, the AppleSoft Basic, which came with Apple II, was the last piece of commercial software Mr. Gates himself had written code for. He was a programmer, and he wrote that code for Apple. I suppose when Steve Jobs called Gates to the rescue, he couldn't say no. And although that token investment from Gates was just symbolic, it was more symbolic than anything, it did turn the fortune of Apple around. As they say, the rest is history. I sincerely doubt anyone thought at the time that Apple would not only surpass Microsoft, but also became the biggest market cap company in the US. Talking about the elder shall serve the younger. However, I do think that many teenage parents seem to hold a very pessimistic attitude towards the next generation. Some people look at economics and say that the American century has come and gone. The 21st century is not going to be the American century. And somehow it also translated, this pessimistic attitude translate into religion too. Many Christian parents doubt their kids will grow up religious. In today's sermon guide, Pastor Leung has this to say: most sermons about parenting focusing on raising young kids, yet not too many talks about dealing with teenagers. Teen can be seen as rebellious as they grew up in an American culture, yet nurtured by Asian parents at home. The situation creates tension at home, and some of the teens drop out of church life as they see this faith is their parents' faith. What does the Bible talk about raising teens? What should both parents and teenagers do to preserve a relationship pleasing to God and enhance harmony? Now, this question that Pastor Leung raised seems to be the question that most parents ask too. If I go around Crosspoint, especially to the parents who belong to the M subzone, that's what they feel. Pastor Leung suggests, my boss, like Pastor Ting Leung, is the one who you saw earlier in the announcement. He's the senior pastor of this church, so he is the one who fixes all the sermon outline and all that. Sermon topic. He suggests the letter to Ephesians and chapter 6, 1-4 as today's passage. Let me read it for you. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, there's no doubt that Ephesians chapter 6, 1-4 is an important passage on parenting. Biblical scholars have a minor discussion about the Greek word children here, techna in Greek. There's some discussion whether it includes adult children. Now, but if you look at it, even if it does not include adult children, it still applies to teenage children for sure. And it seems to me, looking at what he actually said, what Paul wrote that makes sense even for adult children, right? First of all, I know that Paul was addressing children directly. If you could read and understand Paul's letter in general, you could not be very young. You could not be 5 years old to read Paul's letter. If my retired parents remind me of something in the Lord that is according to the Bible, I would, of course, listen, even though I'm an adult. And as Asian, we believe that we should take care of our elderly parents. It is simply the responsibility of adult children to provide for their parents so that they could live graciously in their golden years. But the same can also be said of the other side. Whether your child is 5 or 50 years old, it is your duty as a father to teach them according to the Bible. What Paul wants to encourage fathers to do is to not exasperate their children when they teach. So don't scream, don't yell, don't engage in emotional abuse, which is a kind of domestic violence, but reason with them. Teach them according to the instruction of the Bible. You need some calmness and reason to explain the Bible. Now, why Paul did not say mom cannot train and instruct, note verse 1, right? Such responsibility is also required, it's mandatory for guys, for parents, fathers. So what can we say about this passage? Undoubtedly, Ephesians chapter 6, 1-4 is about how to teach children in general, how to be parents and children in general. However, I would say it is not specifically about teenagers. It doesn't specifically address how to deal with the life stage of teenage. It doesn't talk about what to teach them specifically. So the obvious question about teenage parenting is, how do we train and instruct and teach them what? The task before us is to develop a more scientific understanding of teenage rebellion. And we can assume that there are biblical stories of the adolescent life stage that could serve as our case studies. Now, teenage or adolescent rebellion is a cross-cultural phenomenon, not unique to Asian American family at all. And it is not a recent phenomenon. You can go back to history and you see that all the time. For example, nearly 70 years ago, there was a 1955 film, Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean. The film explored the theme of teenage rebellion through portraying the differences and the conflicts between the two generations. James Dean was a very talented actor, but unfortunately he was killed in a car accident in 1955, the very year the film was released, when he was only 24. So his youthful death is also a certain reminder of the what you may call paradigmatic tragedy of teenage rebellion that got played out in real life over and again. There are different scientific theories of physiology and psychology that explain teenage rebellion. According to one understanding, terror management theory, TMT, everyone is somewhat driven by the instinct to control, to manage their fear of death. Now, young children don't have that quite yet developed, so they don't know too much about death. Young children are dependent on parental care. They are generally content with rewards and praise given by their parents and their teachers. So you give them a gold star, they are happy. But as teenagers and adolescents, the praise and the reward of their parents and the schools and even the churches are no longer enough to give them satisfaction in their life. Realizing that their parents will not be with them forever, teenagers begin to seek a more permanent meaning in their lives. What's the point of appeasing my parents, my teachers, my youth counselor when they won't be with me just in a few years? Teenager asks. Now, what happened is that for some not so smart teenagers, when they think about that, is when they find something to depend on, that's why they try teenage like gangs. They need a more powerful fatherly figure. But if they're smarter, they work harder, knowing that they cannot depend on their parents to pay for their scholarship for the college. So they work harder. So it's all sort of driven by fear. To understand that parents cannot be depended on is a critical moment, which is a sort of what we call a crisis of faith. If it is utilized correctly, if it's channeled correctly, it creates an opportunity of faith. When young people understand that they cannot trust their earthly parents to provide for them, they might shift their allegiance and their dependence to the Heavenly Father. But part of that requires the parents to know how to let go at the right time. Now, parenting requires different strategy at different stage in your life. You cannot let go too soon. Now, if a newborn, if a parent of a newborn asks, like Pastor Sam, like let's say in the S subgroup, what do you do with a newborn who won't stop crying in the middle of the night? What will we say as family pastor? Parents with any experience will say, you got to break their will. Like I always tell my theology student, I do like teach sometimes in seminary, people are born sinners, not angels. If you don't believe in original sin, here is a suggestion. Get married, have a baby, and see for yourself. For little children, parents need to be ruthless. We need to be doing law enforcement in the house, right? Little children need structures and order in order to grow. If you look at the American elementary and secondary education system, it is, objectively, it is behind the rest of the industrialized countries. That is just a fact if you look at test scores and all that. Numbers don't lie. And one reason is that the most influential thinker behind the educational system, John Dewey, was opposed to the idea of a standard curriculum because Dewey did not believe in God, did not believe in supernatural reality, did not believe in objective truths and moral absolute. Dewey rejected all forms of standard curriculum. He believed that children should be allowed to develop freely according to their natural inclination, and that they should be allowed to learn whatever they feel like. So that he thinks that's the best way to mold the educational system is to mold it according to the theory of natural evolution, and you just basically let them learn whatever they want to learn. If you have heard about the idea of new mathematics, that was an application of Dewey theory. It was popular in the 60s and the 70s. Elementary math teachers, very few of them, sorry to say, were even college math majors, introduced elementary students 5 ways to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Some of you might have even still gone through it when you were in kindergarten. And then they will encourage them to decide for themselves what is the most natural way for them to learn to do multiplication. So you pick yourself. The only problem is this: what is most natural for most children is to not even learn, right? They don't even want to learn anything. That's the most natural thing. And of course, Dewey doesn't have time to remind his followers. Statistically speaking, the most common result of natural evolution is to get removed from the gene pool. But enough said about young children. Different stages of life do require different teaching strategy and parenting strategy. You cannot teach a group of rebellious high school and college students to find moral absolutes and meaning in life the same way you teach the multiplication table. As teenage becomes more and more skeptical of the entire social system, the last thing you want, either as a parent or even as a big brother, is to be seen by them as part of the system that oppressed them. The educational system is itself unfairly structured to weed out the so-called losers and to protect the rights of the privileged class. We can indeed speak of a systemic evil in this society, in this world, and the educational system is part of the society. As Paul said in the following verses in Ephesians chapter 6, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. As parents, and as Big Brother, we understand that the world out there is a battlefield, not a paradise. You should be thankful if your children wake up to that and want to turn the table and fight back. I was helping out at a church in San Francisco, a Golden Gate Christian church, in a retreat over the Memorial Day weekend. I met an old girl from one of my alma mater, like my elementary school alma mater. After she listened to me, she asked me, "Hey, Pastor Gideon, did you go through a teenage rebellion yourself? You seem to always kind of like a good kid, right?" I told her, "Of course, I'm still in the rebellious stage myself. If you don't believe me, ask Pastor Chiu, ask Pastor Leung." Of course, Pastor Leung is always very courteous. He would say that, Mill Peters, especially the English ministry, we are becoming more independent. I'm glad that Pastor Leung is not Xi Jinping. Which is like, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Teenagers are naturally rebellious. Whether you are a parent or a big brother, big sister, what should you do? Let them know that you are on their side. Help them beat the system. That's how you should help them. Basically, you have 4 choices, right? First, you can be part of the system that oppresses them. What would you invariably get? More rebellions. Action boomerangs into reaction. But they don't necessarily end up being the winner of the system by you keep pressing down on them. Second, you can help them escape and avoid the fight. But they can avoid it for a time, not for a lifetime. The later they learn to be independent, the harder it is to become independent. How long can you fend for them before they need to be on their own? Now, third, you can just let go and let the chips fall wherever it be, right? The problem is this. They may not rebel against you, but they will almost certainly become the losers in the system. Fourth, you can stand on their side and channel their rebellious energy into something to be more useful, meaning to help them really work at beating the system itself. But how do we guide them to beat back against the system? The most important thing is to give them a sense of mission and a sense of Christian value to resist the systemic evil, even as they enter adolescence. Now here, we in Crosspoint, we run a Crosspoint Institute of Ministry Leadership, kind of like a seminary extension for Gateway Seminary for diploma program. Today, I would like to frame the following as a case study of the Babylonian Imperial Institute of Leadership by way of Daniel chapter 1. Almost all Christians, I think, you have heard of the story of Daniel chapter 1. Often in our study of the book of Daniel, we focus on its prophecies. The book of Daniel has a special place in biblical apologetics, which is the defense of our faith, because of those prophecies, how they miraculously got fulfilled. But the stories of young Daniel were also received as inspirational folk legends for the Jewish kids. For millennia, Jewish children living in exile without their own homeland find strength in the story of the young Daniel as they live in pagan cultures. The story of Daniel chapter 1 contains several important values in life. First, knowledge does not make a person faithless. Second, purity does not make a person heartless. And third, victory in life is rarely timeless. Let me explain. First, the value of knowledge and the fact that knowledge does not make one faithless. I often hear Christians' parents worrying about exposing their children to secular knowledge. They fear that such knowledge of the world will jeopardize their faith. They treat knowledge almost like a kind of virus. They would rather keep their children intellectually quarantined. If the Chinese Communist government would be so generous, they would buy the great firewall from them to surround the internet router at their house. But let us read from Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officers, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. Imagine this now. You are Daniel's father. Someone from the Babylonian Imperial Institute of Leadership came to recruit your son Daniel and invite him to apply. What would you say to Daniel? Wow, would you support your son in going to that school? Or would you start yelling and screaming at Daniel? Why do you want to learn from the enemies? What good can you learn from the Babylonians? And even to serve in the king's court, have you forgotten what they have stolen from the temple of Jerusalem? Perhaps the author of Daniel anticipated that his Jewish readership would ask this question. Therefore, the author makes us clear, very clear. The only reason Nebuchadnezzar could take out Jerusalem is this: he was sent by God. The Babylonians were, of course, brutal and ruthless, but your father, speaking to the Jews, deserved it. Therefore, learning from the Babylonian is not turning to the enemies, for your father's house turned to the real enemies long time ago. Knowledge of the Babylonian culture did not change the faith of Daniel and his friends. On the contrary, it helped them to better understand how ridiculous and self-defeating is the Babylonian religion. It is the same today. If we prepare our teenagers, our children with solid Christian worldview, a secular higher education will not destroy their biblical faith. If their faith can be lost by going to college, it is not real faith in the first place. We should work harder in building that faith. Therefore, if I were Daniel's father, I would not tell Daniel not to go. I would tell him, well, go. But I would remind him, remember, son, Joshua was a spy in Jericho 40 years before he took the city. Chinese, we have a saying, if you know your enemy, you can fight 100 battles with them and you will win all 100 of them. Learn from your enemy. Now, of course, there are some tricks about being a spy, going in the undercover. That's why we organized recently a lot of college and career planning workshops. If you want to help your children to beat the system, we need to be more than cheerleaders. We need to give them real weapons to fight, and sometimes we even stay undercover. I sometimes joke and tell parents, try this. Tell your daughter, put down in their college application, right? The reason I applied to your school is to come here to evangelize, to spread the gospel, to save the souls of all you sinners. See if they take her. If they know that you are an undercover agent, will they just let you in, right? I hope you don't mind. So that's why in this coming Saturday, we'll have one of those talks again. And this time we'll be absolutely shameless in talking about developing a portfolio that best positions someone to get into one of the University of Californias. But know that we do that because we are taking tricks and techniques. Another concern of some of our Christian parents is not that the children will go to college and completely lose their faith, but rather their faith will slowly drift and become adulterated. They will lose the purity of their faith. They worry that their children will still claim to be Christians, and they even think they are still Christians, but in fact, they live no differently than unbelievers. Purity is the second value in Daniel's story. Let us continue. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officers for permission not to defile himself that way. Now God had caused the officers to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief officers had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink, then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants according with what you see then. Okay. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief officials present them to Nebuchadnezzar. We have English Bible study every other Saturday. Yesterday, in our Experiencing God Bible study, we talked about obedience, and Pastor Sam talked about Shema, listen. It might seem that this story about keeping oneself pure and undefiled is about obedience. Yeah, part of it. But see, when we look at the story, we need to always put the story in the context. To obey God, sometimes we need to rebel against the authority. Daniel was brought up to observe the Jewish diet. It was not difficult for him to not eat unclean meat and wine. What is truly remarkable here is, in this story, is the courage of Daniel and his friends demonstrate in defying the Babylonian king so not to defile themselves. Purity is not uncaring about others. Now, some Christian parents, there are a lot of worries, right? One worry that if their children grow up in a very protected Christian environment, they may not be able to resist their peer pressure when they go into a secular context, or they might press to become like lone rangers because they cannot make friends. But look at this story. Purity does not make you an uncaring loner. When the officers, like in some translation, the eunuch, and his subordinate, the commissioner, told Daniel and his friends that their disobedience might cost them their heads, Daniel was what? He was very sympathetic. And in fact, they had already thought of the next move. They came up with a scientific experiment. Give it 10 days. They would relent if the experiment failed. But if they remain healthy, it proves objectively that there is no scientific basis to obey God, the command of the king. You see, Daniel challenged the commissioner's own value system. Even if it came down from the king, it might not be correct, it might not be right. We do not blindly trust our leaders. We use reasons to tell right from wrong. And pay attention to the way Daniel defended his own position of faith. He did not say, oh, I couldn't eat this because my mom told me that. Nor did he say, oh, I'm not eating it, it tastes bad. He defended his faith not by human tradition, not by own personal feeling, not by taste, but he used a common sense reasoning and he used objective evidence. The key to purity and holiness is reason. No more blind faith. True desire of purity also leads to love, because you don't want to just be pure yourself. You want other people around you to be pure. Now, Chinese have a certain esteem for lotus. the flower of lotus, because it is supposed to be clean even though it comes from the mud. If you have see a lotus pond, the lotus flower, that's why like Buddhists, sometimes they use lotus to demonstrate that. There's like one thing clean out of a dirt pool. But if you think about true desire of purity, will not be content with being a lotus. You want the whole world to be purified together with you. Now, as parents, as helpers of teenagers, older brothers and sisters, we might be concerned about, okay, that sounds all good, but where did all this knowledge and wisdom come from? It's good for Daniel, but like, how about my younger brother? How about my son? It doesn't look that smart, right? How would he be able to come up with this like clever test or something like that? And like, where would that courage come from? But the Bible is clear, right? Everything is God-given. Instead of worrying about whether they are smart or wise, how about you just pray for them? Pray that God will make them wise and smart at the right moment. And you can pray for yourself too. I mean, if you worry, how about just pray? Ask God, who is merciful, to give you the wisdom to tackle the difficult situation when you are tested. But, by the way, parents and like big brothers and sisters, we can prepare ourselves more, right? And you can learn a little bit more about apologetics and faith. In the fall, one of our brothers from Pleasanton campus, Caleb Wan, who is a very articulate lawyer and a current student at Gateway Seminary, will offer an apologetics course at CBI. So if you are interested in apologetics, like, don't miss that opportunity. I will also be teaching elementary Greek at the CMO. But point is, we need to be ourselves prepared. That way, when a young person, a teenager, come back to us and ask us questions of faith, you don't want to say, hey, I don't know, I'll go ask the pastor. What you want to know, what you want to say is, you want to impress them by saying, okay, here's what I know. But you go out and learn more yourself, right? Now, of course, like one last point, it is one thing to keep the faith while you are in school. College is still a very protected environment. When they go out to the real world, it's another thing altogether. When they go to graduate school, it's another thing already. You can always find loopholes in a system. That's how you beat the system. But just because you can figure out how to beat the system doesn't mean you can fix it. Daniel 1:19-21 at the end of this chapter give us much food for thought in concluding this story. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus, which is not a Babylonian king, but a Persian king who overturned the Babylonian. Now, you could say that Daniel beat the system. That sounds like a victorious ending, right? Not only did they survive that imperial institute of leadership, they got placed into high-paying jobs to serve the king, okay? But you think about it. What kind of victory is this really? I don't know how high the IQ of Daniel and his friend was, like maybe 130, 150, 180. But if he was 10 times smarter than the other magicians, what would their IQ be? 13, 15, 18, not even 20? Today we would put them in the mentally retarded category. But isn't that exactly what happened when young people, when you start working, go into school, it's like, okay, see a lot of people that seem to be smart, but once you go out to work, they realize that their co-workers really aren't that smart. In fact, the company is not making any progress. Why? Because their boss isn't quite smart either. And the boss of their boss, the owner of the company, is simply an idiot who inherited the business from his father. So what happens in the end? If it's a company, it might fail. If it's a government, it collapses. The last words illustrate this reality. Although Daniel saw all the problems of the Babylonian government and was even in a high position, he could do nothing to save it. Daniel himself witnessed the overthrow of Babylon by the Persian king Cyrus. Now, when Daniel was young, he might simply want to beat the system, perhaps climb higher and higher, gave him a sense of success. But when Daniel was old, I imagine he was more prone to want to save the system. Unfortunately, every generation expires. That's kind of what the idiom, the elder will serve the younger, has come to mean in English when we say it today. If it is God's plan, no one can stop a generation from passing when it has run its course. At some point, the elder will serve the younger. You cannot stop it, even if you want to. However, that is not a passive life attitude to say that the elder will serve the younger. At least for the young people who are still in the wild, it is a motivation to strive to come in and take out the incumbent. For those who are still trying hard to hold on to their power still in the palace, this is also a good reminder, a good constant reminder. Some people might want to come to cancel what you have built. No need to get mad, no need to be sad. You know, how do you know what is built is really that good anyway? Like perhaps it has long passed its useful expiration date. Maybe it is time to step off the stage. It is important to teach young people a healthy view of history. There's always one wave after another in the Yangtze River, as the Chinese say. There are a lot. So young people need to know they are not the first, and chances are they are not the last. What that means is that you need to learn from the past and contribute something new and unique. Now, those people who don't know history is most prone to repeat history. If people think that they can find a new path without learning from the past, they are simply destined to never even get started. Because they will keep repeating the same mistake without knowing that it is a mistake. They will just be reinventing the wheel behind closed doors. On the contrary, if people stick to the old stuff and never come up with anything new, they will just be eliminated from the competition. The world moves on with or without you. So that's why you need to both learn from the past and contribute something new. And that is indeed how you look at the Bible from a progressive historical revelation perspective. Each generation has a new contribution to make to history. Therefore, each generation is not just there to invent, but also to preserve the original insight for future generation. Daniel 1 is really a prelude to the last chapter of this book, where God commanded the old Daniel, "Go on your way, Daniel, for the words are secret and sealed under the time of the end. But as for you, go on your way to the end. You will rest, and then you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance at the end of the days." Now, keeping it secret and sealed doesn't mean hid it away. It is more like encrypt it and seal it so that it is well preserved, so that it won't be destroyed. You don't need to worry about the next generation not keeping your stuff. In the final judgment, each generation will be rewarded according to their unique contribution. What if the next generation forget about you and cancel everything you have done? Don't worry, that generation is going away too. Most importantly is that God will remember what you have done. When young people think about the meaning of their life, that is what we should tell them and encourage them to think about. There is a mission. The mission is not just to hold on to what their parents have left behind, but to go beyond what their parents have achieved and accomplished, so that their children and their children can go further. And as we say in Chinese again, for one way follows another in the Yangtze River. To make that happen, Parents need to impart onto their children the right value system, as we learn today. Knowledge does not make you faithless. Purity does not make you heartless. And remember, victory is rarely timeless. Your victory is not found in defeating the old generation or even winning over the next generation. God is the triumph that you have at the end. You are accountable to God for everything you do in this life. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us this day, for giving us the generation in front of us, young people that will rise up to do your work. And we are not faithless. We are not hopeless. We know that in your sovereign plan, you will rise up the right people. Even though the world seems to be declining, even though this country is problematic in so many ways, we know that you have your plan. And who can stop you when you're willing to transform their hearts and make this place once again yours? So we do pray that whether we are old people or young people, will come humble before you, so that you will come again and heal this land. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Let us sing